All right. Technical Circular 5588-1 Rail Handbook and for Air Brake Training Hand Rules, March 2008. Distribution Restriction Approved for Public Release. Distribution Unlimited. Headquarters Department of Army. Chapter 2. All right, Chapter 2, Rules for Air Brake Test and Inspection. Rule 2.1, responsible for the train inspector and test, the operation supervisor joint responsible for the inspector, engine, the train man with the condition of the brake equipment, the locomotive, the car to stand with the possible defective effective equipment required for the inspection testing, while air brake tests being made with the trains under the jurisdiction employed for the makes of such staff that the train must be moved until authorized to do so. It must be determined that all employees are safely positioned before authority to be moved is granted. During air brake tests, the brakes must be not be applied released until the proper signal is given. Employees in charge of the air test responsible for giving the signal to apply the brakes, but is necessary to work under the car of the train's accidental movement of the car being with work could occur. The position handbrakes must be applied adjacent to the car to prevent such movement. Rule 2.2, inspection of freight cars. Each car must be placed in the train must receive the following safety inspection care. Any car found with a defect that makes unsafe the movement of it must be corrected to side out of the train. Car must be checked for leaning or listing to the side, sagging downward position, import proper on the truck, object drawing below, objects descended from the side doors and securely attached, broken and missing safety appliance, handrail, ladder, stirrup, the lading leak of the black card hazards, material, insecure coupling device, overheated wheel and journal broken, extensive crack wheel, brakes, fails and release. Any other repair and safety hazard likely to cause adjacent casualty before the train arrived at the destination. Retain the valve set to the exhaust position. Open top loads include trailers and contain flat cars must be safely loaded while width and height of the pier close to the clearance line. Check for the movement has been cleared for the proper authority. Freight cars can be carrying bad order tags which are safe to move in it. May be taken in the train to the nearest point where the repairs can be made. Inspection of the black card cards must be included while the visual inspection to see if the trucks and journal boxes are in proper condition for service. The friction journal boxes must have minimal level of 1 inch visible oil before loaded in black card are except for the movement of the train beyond the required inspection point, which includes the interchange with the other railroads. And inspection must be made to ensure that the cars are safe condition for the movement. Unsafe shipments must be rejected. Rule 2.3, coupling the train and charging. After a locomotive has been coupled to the train, the couplers between the locomotive and the train, whether possible for the entire train, must be stressed to see that all the couplings are made where known, but the engineer must be first apply the locomotive brake before the air hose between the locomotive and the train or coupling condensation should be blown from them and slightly opening the angle of the cock. After the coupling of the brake pipe over the angle cock of the locomotive must be opened slowly. The angle cock handles must be located on the open position when the charging train. If the main reserve pressure drops below 105 psi, turn off the generator field switch for the center of the reverse handle and advanced throttle is needed, but no higher than number 4 position. The main reserve pressure must be closely observed. When the gauge indicates 120 psi, throttle must be reduced to idle to full. Fuel conservation must be considered during this procedure. When the main reserve air is used, charge the auxiliary and work train equipment such as the derricks, plows, respirators, into pneumatic side dump or bottom dump cars. Sound judgment should be exercised maintaining the main reserve pressure. When standing in the dynamic brake position, the engine control must not be used to increase the engine speed for the purpose for the charging air brake system. Overcharged air brake equipment on locomotives can be corrected by one of the following methods. Make 2 or more 20 psi brake pipe reductions and release. Make 1 emergency brake application release. Train line overcharged using the following procedures. Adjust the regulating valve to desired pressure. Place an automatic brake valve brake in emergency for 1 minute. Place the automatic brake valve in the release position until the brake pressure reaches 20 psi. Place the automatic brake valve in the continuous service for 1 minute. Place the automatic brake valve in the release position. Rule 2.4, Calibrated Telemetry System. A calibrated telemetry system may be used to assist the making of the air brake test. For the location of the telemetry system initially installed with the calibration check must be performed. To perform the calibration check of the pressure indicated with the end of the train telemetry device must be compared with the pressure to the display on the head end of the device. The difference between the two readings does not exceed 3 psi. The telemetry system may be used in making any of the air brake tests. When making an air brake test, calibrated tester and telemetry may be used to determine the following. Air pressure for the rear of the train, the brake of the rear of the car, the train have been applied with the release for the telemetry system indicated with the brake pipe pressure reduction of at least 5 psi followed by pressure increase of at least 5 psi. Rule 2.5, leakage test procedure. During the brake pipe leakage, when the coupling controlling the locomotive of the yard, air brake test is equipped with maintaining the feature must be cut out during the train air brake leakage test. After required by the brake pipe reduction has been made, the leakage test is required to perform the following tests in the sequence shown. Make a 20 psi pipe pressure reduction. Wait at least 60 seconds after the brake pipe has been stopped exhausting the automatic brake valve. Cut out the pressure maintaining feature with moving the automatic brake valve out of position. Wait at least 60 seconds for the brake pipe pressure to stabilize. Determine the brake pipe leakage for 1 minute, making sure that it does not exceed 5 psi per minute. If the leakage exceeds 5 psi per minute, notify who are inspecting the train. Excessive leakage exists. The train must inspect the leaks and leakage corrected. After leakage is corrected, leakage test must be replaced. If leakage within the allowable limits after receiving the proper release signal, place the automatic brake valve handle in the release or running position. Cutting in the pressure, maintaining from the placing of the pressure brake valve cutoff valve with the freight or passenger position with the appropriate surface to be formed. Note that those who are inspecting their train the brakes have been released. Rule 2.6 Initial terminal air test. This test must be performed under any of the following conditions. See Table 2.1. When the train is originally made up when the train consists of change other than by adding or removing solid blocks of car air brake reserves remain charged. When the train receives the interchange of the train consisting of change other than one of the combination of the following, the car air brake reserves may remain charged. Removing and adding solid blocks of cars and changing locomotive changing, removing of the caboose. While the test is required, performing the following tests: inspection testing are required for the air pressure change of the air brake system, the 15-pound for the locomotive regulating valve setting indicated with the gauge of the device connected to the brake pipe. Rear of the train during the test do not apply with the release of the brakes unless the proper notification is received. Do not actuate test linkage with the proper notification received for the process perform leakage test. See Rule 2.5. Inspection of brake application. Inspection of brake application to determine the angle cock of the position properly should be retained in the valves. Check for the leakage brake supply for each of the car. Any car found with the inoperative brakes having the condition corrected on the car must be set out before the train departs the initial terminal. This position of the travel is corrected with the freight car. Air brake piston travel must be adjusted nominal 7 inches of the travel to less than 7 inches more than on the body's brake cylinder. Minimum brake cylinder position travel. Amount of the brake cylinder must be sufficient to provide proper brake shoe clearance where the brakes are released. Maximum piston travel must not exceed 9 inches on the type of the equipment. The piston travel the brake cylinder on the freight car equipment other than the standard signal capacity brake that may be adjusted indicated with the brake badge on the stencil on the car. The brake rigging does not bind or foul. All parts of the brake equipment are properly secured. When the piston travel over the body mounted brake cylinder exceeds 10.5 inches, the piston travel over the truck mounted brake cylinder exceeds 6 inches. The piston travel of the brake cylinder other than the standard single capacity brake exceeds the specification on the badge plate specification stencil on the car. The air brakes must be considered as being inoperative. Any cars found with the inoperative brakes must have the condition corrected, but the car must be moved from the end of the train. That must not be moved in the train. Inspection testing completion. When the test inspection of the air brake application completion of the proper notification has been received and release the brakes. Notify the inspection training of the brake that has been released. Inspection each brake to make sure that the brakes have been already to release. The inspection may be made by roll-by. Notification of the engineer. Qualified person participating in the test inspection who know that the test was completed must notify the engineer initially. Terminal air test. See Rule 2.6 if it is performed satisfactory. Rule 2.7. The transfer and train yard train movement. Transfer train and yard train movement and air test. The transfer the train and yard train movement that exceed 20 miles must have the initial terminal air test on transfer train and the yard train movements that exceed 1 mile, but not more than 20 miles. Perform the following tests. Charge the air brake system to at least 60 psi. Engineer determine the brake pipe pressure cutting out the automatic brake valve, noting that the pressure of the brake pipe pressure to stabilize the indicator with the brake pipe pressure gauge. Make the 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Visually see the brake pipes apply on each car. Rule 2.8 Application release air test. The test must be performed under any of the following conditions. Instructions. Cars are set out when required. Rule 2.11 Picking up the cars en route and locomotive and caboose are changed. Controlling locomotive units that change the locomotive units are picked up and set out. The test is required performing the following tasks. Change the air brake system within 15 psi of locomotive regulating valve set at the indicated gauge of the rear of the train. Calibrating telemetry system receive proper notification to apply the brakes. Make the 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Determine the brake apply with the release from the rear car with one of the following methods. Observe the calibrated telemetry system of the brake pipe reduction at least 5 psi followed by the pressure increase at least 5 psi. Visually observe the brakes on the rear car. Observing the brake pipe pressure is being restored on the rear of the train. Rule 2.9 Detaching locomotive or separating the train. Complete the following tasks when detaching locomotive, separating the train or the cars from being handled with the air brakes. Make at least a 20 psi brake pipe pressure reduction. Engineer must notify the crew that the air has been stopped. Exhausting automatic brake valve. Close the angle cock on the locomotive unit at the rear of the car will remain within the locomotive. Make sure the angle cock on the detached portion of the train car is left standing to open the low emergency brake application detached portion. Rule 210, recoupling locomotive of cars separated more than 2 hours. If the recoupling of the cars has been separated for the locomotive more than 2 hours, conduct the initial terminal air test. Rule 26. Separated with the 2 hours or less after the recoupling of the cars with being handled with the air brakes that have not been separated from the locomotive more than 2 hours, perform the following tests. Open the angle cocks to determine the brake pipe pressure that is being restored for the rear of the train by the gauge and calibrated telemetry system. In absence of the gauge and calibrated telemetry system, visually observe the brake applied with the release of the rear of the car. 211. Pick up the cars en route. Not previously tested. When picking up the cars that have not been previously air tested or cars in which the air brake pipe has been depleted over 2 hours, perform the following test. Change the air brake system. Charge the air brake system to 75 psi. Indicate with the air gauge of the rear of the train. Calibrated telemetry system. Receive the proper notification to apply the brakes. Perform the leakage test from Rule 25. Determine that the brake supply release on all the cars are picked up. Determine the brake supply of the release of the rear car with one of the following methods. Observe an uncalibrated telemetry brake pipe reduction at least 5 psi, followed by the pressure including at least 5 psi. Visually observe the brakes on the rear of the car. Observe the brake pipe pressure for the being restored with the rear of the car. Previously tested. When picking up the cars that have been previously air tested, the air of the brake in these cars that have not been depleted over 2 hours, perform the application release air test in Rule 28. Cars added to the train must be given the initial terminal air test. See Rule 26. The next terminal where the facilities are available for such inspection. Rule 212, running the air test. Before creating the grades anticipation for the extent of the descent of the air brake with the necessary for the control of the speed of the train, engineer must determine the brake pipe pressure from the beginning with maintaining the rear of the train. The pressure cannot be determined. The engineer must apply with the train brake with sufficient force to determine the brakes are operating with properly. The train must be stopped with the cause of the failure to be determined and with the corrected. Rule 213, airflow method brake test. The following test of the train air brake system used for the airflow method. Airflow method must be able to be performed only with the controlling locomotive of the train is equipped with the following operations. 26L brake equipment, calibrated airflow meter, end of the train device. When the test is required, perform the following test. Charge the brake system within 15 pounds of the regulating valve setting will indicate with the accurate gauge for the rear of the train. Observe the brake flow indicator. Note the indicator pointer or left of the 60 cubic feet per minute calibration mark. After receiving the proper signal, make the 20 psi brake pipe reduction. However, do not cut out the brake valve cutout cock with the employees assisting with the test will observe the cars and train for the application brakes that is required by the type that is being tested. After the proper signal and the engineer will release the brakes and release will be observed shown in Rule 25. The train must proceed upon indication brake for the rear car after the release after the airflow method. The indicator pointer is now returned toward the left. If any time the airflow method indicator becomes inoperative, the engineer will revert the brake pipe leakage for the test prescribed for the air brake train handling rules instructions. Rule 25. During the train operation, the airflow method indicator the move of the pointer does not return to the limit established for the initial terminal air test within the responsible time. 15 pound brake pipe gradient cannot be maintained. The train crew must notify the train dispatcher and yard master. The train dispatcher and yard master will arrange the train its inspector repair if any of the leaks are found. Table 2-1 air test quick reference. Note that the chart means is meant for the quick reference only. It is based on the freight trains with the 90 psi regulating valve setting with the control of the locomotive the unit advised to refer to the appropriate rule of the detailed information requiring each test. Alright, your air take test. The initial term 26, 70 psi, brake pipe reduction 20, leakage test yes. Transfer train yard and transfer and training yard 2 ABTH rule 2 to 7. Pressure required 60 psi. Brake pipe reduction 20 psi. Leakage test no. Application release 2 to 8 75 psi. 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Leak test no. Intermediate inspection 2 to 10. Non-specified brake required pressure 20 psi. Brake pipe reduction yes. Leakage test. Pickup cars en route 2 to 11 ABTH rule 75 psi. Pressure required 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Leakage test yes. Inbound brake inspection 2 to 12. Not applicable. Pressure required 60 psi brake pipe reduction. Leakage test required none. Recoupling locomotives 2 to 13. Non-specified required pressure 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Leakage test none. Alright, Chapter 3 Rules for train equipment and securement.